We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. If it seems like the First Amendment is hanging in the balance, this week's stories show that that battle is still raging. We have a packed show for you this week, and remember, Liberty Nation Radio is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com. You can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange set to be freed. That's good news for Julian Assange, but what does it mean for the First Amendment in the United States? That's the big question to deal with. And to help us deal with that question, we're joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott Cosenza, Esquire. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Thank you, Mark.
Now, Scott, I guess the important thing is figuring out what process by which Mr. Assange is about to be freed. At time of recording, he still hasn't been for the actual hearing, but we presume that it's been approved by the U.S. Department of Justice and is going ahead. So what process took place here to end his 5 years of imprisonment in the United Kingdom?
Julian Assange wouldn't have been able to walk down the hall of Belmarsh Prison to the rec room without the approval of Joe Biden and the power establishment in the United States, who are the ones who have kept him in prison in the UK. It's kind of wacky to think about that it's not necessarily the UK authorities that have a horse in this race, but it's the US authorities that have compelled them to imprison this person. And that's what's going on. The process is just their way of, I think, maintaining the cover that they weren't attacking this man for journalism, but instead for some crime that is, relatable to the American people. And I don't think that's true. I think he was prosecuted and persecuted for acts of journalism. But in any case, he's set to be freed. And as you said, not at this very moment yet, but fingers crossed. I'm one of the ones who calls him a First Amendment hero. And I'm glad that he's not a First Amendment martyr, because I think that instead of putting him in a Marianas Islands courtroom, they wanted to throw him to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, was how things were headed there for him.
So initially there was an indictment, a sealed indictment that came under the Trump administration, I believe in 2018, and then that got processed up to a further 17 indictments, ranging from espionage, which is apparently the charge that he's pleading guilty to, and a range of other things that involve national security issues. But now with this agreement, he can literally actually just walk free. He'll be sent back to Australia, his home country, and it'll be time served of 62 months, which he's already served in the Belmarsh prison in Britain. So what life lies ahead for Mr. Assange?
Well, a life probably confined to Australia and other countries that will admit him, and not the United States probably, and not Europe. But I imagine that he will be telling his story publicly, now that he can do it himself. He was forced to do it mostly through intermediaries before. But it's a story that will be, I don't know, well received is the right word, but Americans will be interested to hear it, I think. He has a lot to say about how he was treated at the hands of Americans for journalism.
So let's delve into this, Scott. You said a couple of times now that he was essentially imprisoned and is being punished for journalism. And I think that's a distinction that really separates where people fall on this issue. So you have, on the one hand, you have people who say that he was engaged in journalism, doing something that news outlets do on a regular basis, which is essentially they come across some information and they're putting it out.
If he worked for the New York Times, we'd all know his name, not because he was imprisoned, but because he was given the Pulitzer Prize Award and other fantastic feats of laud plaudits and congratulatory things. He'd have a chair in journalism somewhere, I think. Instead, because of his independent nature and WikiLeaks, he was imprisoned.
And so that comes to the other side. Those who say that he should be in prison for espionage against the United States, exposing national secrets. And I believe one of the largest claims against him was that endangering military personnel and endangering Afghan citizens who had provided information to the US military by exposing their names. Now, I know that there was a 100+ person investigation that went into this, and they couldn't find any direct evidence that anybody had been harmed by the leaks. But I think the principle behind it was that they could have been. And because he didn't follow a journalistic practice of, because, for example, let's say the New York Times, if they were to run with the information that Julian Assange put out.
Let me just stop you right there for a second, because what we learned is they lied about it. So
yes.
what could have been true wasn't true, because what the establishment couldn't say is, we're really mad that he published our true facts that you are outraged about when you learn them. And many Americans were outraged by the facts they learned, the uncontested facts about how the U.S. was prosecuting its war in Iraq. And they were embarrassed about that fact. And so what they did was, instead of say, this is unacceptable, that our true nature has been revealed, let's throw up this smokescreen over here, which never happened. You just said yourself they couldn't come up with an actual Afghan who had been negatively affected. You know who's negatively affected some Afghan lives? Well, I'll let the people decide, right? Whether it's Julian Assange or perhaps the United States government who's negatively affected Afghan lives. And what Julian Assange said was, by the way, when he was back before, he's been now in some kind of custody or asylum / custody for over 15 years. Before that, he said that nobody would win the Afghanistan war because all it was to bilk the American taxpayers of their money, which would go to Afghanistan and then basically come back to kind of, establishment supporting types. And I'll leave it to the fact checkers to decide if that's actually what happened or not. But I think that there's a credible case to suggest that that is what happened.
And so how has the media in general treated Julian Assange over these, as you say, 15 years?
The establishment media has, by and large, vilified him and supported the establishment cause, and the independent media has, by and large, lionized him and held him up as a hero.
Why do you think that is?
Because the establishment media are, by and large, transcriptionists and spokesperson for the establishment. And, we're told that it's going to be an espionage charge, and you mentioned espionage earlier. And I think that when most people think of espionage, they think of someone discovering secrets to then apply to or to then benefit a rival or enemy of the espionage target, right? But that's not what happened here. It's not like Julian Assange discovered secrets that the United States had and then was going to publish them to the benefit of the North Koreans or the Chinese or something like that. He was going to publish true facts that the keepers of those secrets didn't wish to be revealed. We can all agree on that. But his motivation should matter.
And that, of course, brings us to the actual fact of what he's pleaded guilty to and how that is going to impact the First Amendment for journalists in both media, mainstream media and independent outlets going forward. We'll be back with Scott Cosenza after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.